This is a big one. Here comes a big one.
Oh my God.
She ain't gonna like the boat, depends on it.
Out on the icy waters of the Bering Sea, where survival is a daily battle against nature's fury, the crew pulled up something unimaginable. A catch, not of this world. The pot broke the surface and, tangled in seaweed and ropes, was a metallic object glowing faintly under the stormy sky. Its smooth grooves and alien-like symbols left the hardened crew frozen in disbelief. Tune in as this shocking discovery takes a turn no one could have foreseen, unraveling secrets the sea has hidden for centuries. The enigma beneath the waves. It started like any other haul. The team was pulling up their crab pots one after the other with the familiar clanking of machinery and the steady churn of ocean waves. The catches were solid, brimming with fat crabs worth big money. Captain Jonathan, a seasoned veteran of the trade, had been in the game for decades and today felt like another win. The chatter on deck was lighthearted, filled with talk of what they'd do when they got back home. Maybe they'd celebrate with a warm meal or get some much-needed sleep. Little did they know the sea had plans to flip their world upside down. But as the crew reached for the last pot, a strange resistance jolted the line, like something was pulling back. As they dragged up another pot, something glimmered below the surface. At first, it seemed like a trick of the light, just the sun bouncing off the icy waves. But then it became clearer, a peculiar shimmer cutting through the usual murk of seawater. Tangled in the ropes and netting, partially hidden by mud and seaweed, was something that did not belong. It wasn't a crab, that was for sure. The object shimmered strangely, catching the faint light even through the fog. As it broke the surface, the crew fell silent. All eyes locked on the thing as it clunked heavily onto the deck, the sound of metal on wood breaking through the constant roar of the wind. The crew gathered around, their boots thudding against the wet planks. It was metallic, about the size of a truck tire, and covered in barnacles. Grooves and strange markings ran across its surface, almost like a puzzle carved into the metal. These were men who'd spent their lives hauling up all sorts of oddities from the depths, but this was different. It looked like it belonged in a sci-fi movie, not the bottom of the Bering Sea. The wind howled and waves crashed against the boat, but the crew was frozen in place, their eyes glued to the object. One of them reached out hesitantly, brushing off the seaweed and barnacles. The markings became clearer, lines and symbols that didn't look random. They looked deliberate, like they held a message, though no one could begin to guess what it was. Captain Jonathan's voice eventually broke the spell. He ordered the object secured below deck. There was work to be done, crabs to catch, a storm closing in. But the usual rhythm of their work felt off, like the object had thrown everything out of balance. The crew followed orders, but their minds were elsewhere, filled with questions about the mysterious object. With the catch secured and the strange object stowed away, the crew pushed through the growing waves. The storm was getting closer, and they had to focus if they wanted to make it back in one piece. But even as they worked, their thoughts kept drifting to the thing below deck. What was it? How did it end up tangled in their gear? The sea had always been full of mysteries, but this one felt bigger than anything they'd encountered before. By the time they reached Dutch Harbor, word had already started to spread. Whispers traveled quickly in the tight-knit fishing community, and it wasn't long before locals and other fishermen were asking questions, their curiosity as sharp as the icy wind. Everyone had a theory. Some thought it was part of an old shipwreck, debris from a vessel lost to the sea long ago. Others said it might be a piece of a fallen satellite, something dragged down to the ocean floor before finding its way into the crew's nets. But there were also whispers of something more, otherworldly. The object was stashed away in the shipyard, hidden under a heavy tarp. Captain Jonathan wasn't ready to let anyone near it. He'd spent his life on the sea, and he knew when something didn't belong. This thing, it was a stranger in their world, and he wasn't sure it was safe to share it. He felt protective of it, like it was his responsibility now. Experts started showing up claiming they could identify it. One said it looked like a piece of advanced tech, but not from any country they could name. Another suggested it might be ancient, something lost to time in the waves. But no one could explain the strange markings etched into its surface. They weren't letters, not from any language anyone recognized. They weren't just scratches either. They were precise, deliberate, like they held a message only the sea could understand. As the days turned into weeks, the crew tried to go back to their normal routine. They went out on more trips, hauled up more crab pots, and cashed in on their hard work. But no matter how many pounds of crab they pulled from the depths, the object lingered in their minds. It was like a ghost, a silent reminder of the unknown. Even the thrill of a good catch couldn't shake its hold on them. At night, Captain Jonathan found himself drawn to the shipyard. He'd stand there in the cold, staring at the tarp-covered object. Sometimes he'd pull the tarp back, running his fingers over the smooth, polished surface. The markings seemed to glow faintly under the moonlight, like they were alive, like they were waiting. Then the strangers arrived, dark cars parked just outside the shipyard, their drivers staying out of sight but not out of mind. The crew noticed them too. They felt watched, followed. Captain Jonathan's unease grew. These weren't locals. They weren't reporters or curious fishermen. They were something else entirely. The object seemed to hum with a quiet energy, almost like it knew its time in hiding was coming to an end. The crew's unease turned into fear. They'd brought something up from the deep, something that wasn't meant to be found, and now they couldn't shake the feeling that it was changing everything around them. Whatever they'd pulled from the ocean, it wasn't just metal and markings, it was a mystery that wouldn't let go. And as they stared out at the stormy horizon, they knew one thing for sure: their lives would never be the same. The days that followed were filled with more questions than answers. The crew tried to keep busy, focusing on their work, but the object had a way of creeping back into their thoughts. Even the most seasoned among them couldn't shake the feeling that they'd stumbled onto something far bigger than they could understand. More experts arrived, each bringing their own theories and equipment. Some tried to test the object, measuring its weight, its density, even its temperature. But the object seemed to resist their efforts. It was heavy, impossibly so for its size, and the markings defied analysis. They weren't etched by hand, nor were they created by any known machine. The more the experts studied it, the more baffled they became. Meanwhile, the strangers in the dark cars grew bolder. They began asking questions, approaching the crew when they thought no one else was watching. Their inquiries were pointed, almost accusatory, as if they already knew more than they were letting on. Captain Jonathan's unease turned to suspicion. He began to wonder if these strangers had been looking for the object long before his crew had pulled it from the sea. One night, a storm rolled in, the kind that shakes buildings and rattles windows. The wind howled through Dutch Harbor and rain lashed against the tin roofs of the buildings. The crew gathered at a local bar, a place they went to unwind after long trips. But the mood was tense, the strange object casting a long shadow over their thoughts. The sea always delivers surprises, but this one was different. An uneasy catch in the depths. As the storm clouds loomed closer, the crew knew they had to focus on the task at hand. There was still crab to catch, and their season's success depended on hitting their target. But the strange object was impossible to ignore. Every time they glanced at it, they felt a mix of fascination and dread. The sea had thrown them plenty of curveballs over the years, but this was something new. And as they worked, the thought lingered in the back of their minds. What else could be out there, hidden in the depths? The object seemed almost otherworldly, as if it didn't belong to this planet. Its smooth surface, intricate carvings, and unnatural weight made it unlike anything they'd ever encountered. It didn't resemble any known piece of equipment or debris, and that made it all the more unsettling. The ocean is vast and largely unexplored, a place where the unexpected can and often does happen. But this was beyond anything the crew could have imagined. Hours passed, but the tension didn't ease. The object remained on the deck, secured but still drawing every eye. The crew's chatter became sparse, their usual banter replaced by cautious glances and hushed conversations. Captain Jonathan, a man known for his steady demeanor, seemed unusually tense. He kept looking at the object, his expression a mix of curiosity and concern. Whatever this thing was, it had disrupted the rhythm of their lives at sea. The storm finally hit, and the crew's attention shifted back to survival. Waves crashed against the boat and the wind howled with a fury that made every movement a challenge. But even as they battled the elements, the strange object was never far from their thoughts. It sat there, unmoving but undeniably present, a silent reminder that the sea still had the power to surprise them in ways they couldn't predict. When the storm passed, the crew was left with the task of deciding what to do with their unusual find. Some suggested throwing it back, unwilling to deal with the unease it brought. Others argued for keeping it, convinced that it might be worth something or at least provide some answers. Captain Jonathan, ever the pragmatist, decided they'd take it back to shore. Whatever it wasn't something they could just leave behind. Back on land, the object became the subject of intense speculation. Experts were called in to examine it, but no one could determine its origin or purpose. Its markings didn't match any known language or symbols, and its material was unlike anything commonly found in the ocean. Some thought it might be a piece of experimental technology lost at sea. Others theorized it could be something far older, perhaps even ancient. The crew's discovery made headlines, drawing attention from scientists, historians, and conspiracy theorists alike. Everyone wanted to know where the object had come from and what it might mean. But for Captain Jonathan and his crew, it was a reminder of the unpredictable nature of their work. The sea is vast, strange, and full of surprises. And every once in a while, it offers up something that makes even the most seasoned sailors stop and wonder. The storm was still creeping closer, and tension gripped the crew. They had stashed the object out of sight, but it was impossible to forget. Every now and then, someone would glance toward the hidden compartment where it lay. They tried to stay focused on the job, pulling up crab pots one after another, but the ocean had turned restless. The waves slammed harder against the boat, and the air felt thick, almost like it carried a warning. The haul that day was incredible. Pot after pot came up loaded with crabs, their shells glowing red under the cold gray sky. It should have been a moment of celebration, but unease lingered like a shadow. Even as Captain Jonathan called the last pot aboard, signaling it was time to head back, his mind was elsewhere. They had what they needed, a golden bounty of king crabs, but the thing below deck refused to let him feel relief. He couldn't shake the sense that they'd disturbed something they shouldn't have. Back at Dutch Harbor, word spread faster than the tide. The crew had come home with more than just their catch, and curiosity grew wild. Fishermen, locals, even reporters started showing up, their questions spilling out before the crew could even dock properly. Was it a piece of history, a forgotten artifact from the depths, or something no one had ever seen before? Theories flew left and right, but no one had answers. Back on shore, news about what the crew found spread fast, but the questions it raised were just the beginning of what was coming. Locals wonder about the strange find. Captain Jonathan made sure the object stayed under wraps, tucked in the back of the shipyard far from prying eyes. He felt a strange protectiveness over it, though he couldn't explain why. Experts were brought in, but their guesses only added to the confusion. Some said it was part of a satellite that had fallen from space. Others thought it might be a fragment of an old ship lost to the unforgiving Bering Sea. Yet none of the theories fit. The object's markings weren't letters, nor were they random scratches. They were precise, deliberate, as if someone or something had carved them for a purpose. Days passed, and the crew tried to push the object from their minds, but it was impossible. Every conversation circled back to it, and wild theories turned into heated debates. Some of the locals were convinced it came from a UFO, a piece of alien technology that had crashed into the ocean. Others whispered about government experiments gone wrong. Captain Jonathan didn't know what to think. He'd seen storms that could rip a ship apart, creatures from the deep that belonged in nightmares, but this was different. It was unexplainable, and that made it unsettling. At night, Jonathan found himself wandering back to the shipyard. He'd stand in front of the covered object, staring at it like it might reveal its questions. The strange markings seemed to hum with an energy he couldn't describe. It felt like the object wanted to be understood, like it was waiting for something. But for what? That question haunted him, and it seemed the rest of the crew. The object's presence started to change things. The crew felt it too. They couldn't name it, but there was a heaviness, a sense that the object didn't belong here. Some of them began to wonder aloud if they should have just left it in the ocean. There was a growing fear that by bringing it aboard, they'd invited something into their lives they couldn't handle. One stormy night, rain pounded the rooftops and wind howled through the streets of Dutch Harbor. The crew gathered at a local bar trying to shake the weight that had settled over them. They drank and talked, but the mood was grim. What should they do with the object? Some thought they should call in more experts, someone with real answers. Others argued it might be better to leave it alone, to bury it somewhere and forget it ever existed. Captain Jonathan sat quietly, lost in thought. He knew the ocean held things best left undiscovered, but now it was too late. They had it, and he couldn't shake the feeling that it was important, that it mattered in a way he couldn't yet understand. When the bar finally emptied and the storm raged on outside, Jonathan made his way back to the shipyard alone. The object was still there, hidden under its tarp. He pulled it back and ran his hand over its smooth surface. The markings seemed to glow faintly in the dim light, almost alive. Jonathan knew they had stumbled onto something much bigger than their small fishing world. Whatever it wasn't just a random piece of debris. It had a purpose, and it wasn't finished. The following weeks were tense. The crew returned to work hauling crabs as usual, but the object never left their thoughts. It was always there, a silent weight pressing down on them. People in town kept asking questions, their curiosity turning into obsession. Jonathan grew more guarded, keeping the object's location confidential. He felt the pressure mounting, but he wasn't ready to let it go. Theories grew wilder with every passing day. Some believed the object held ancient knowledge, something left behind by a civilization we'd forgotten. Others insisted it was proof of extraterrestrial life, a piece of evidence humanity wasn't ready to face. And then there were those who said it was cursed, that it carried bad luck for anyone who touched it. The crew's unease grew. Small accidents started happening on the boat. A line snapped, narrowly missing one of the deckhands. Equipment failed without warning. Each mishap added to their fear, making it harder to dismiss the idea that the object was more than it seemed. With strange people now watching them, the crew felt their find was dragging them into something much bigger and much harder to escape. The glow that changed everything. One night, Jonathan stood alone at the shipyard, staring at the object like he had so many times before. The storm clouds overhead seemed to mirror his thoughts, heavy and unrelenting. He knew he couldn't keep it hidden forever. Something had to be done. But what? Destroy it? Hand it over to the authorities? Or keep it and risk the unknown? Against his instincts, Jonathan let the man examine their strange discovery. The man's questions were vague, his notes hurried, and he left just as strangely as he arrived, promising to follow up. Yet something about him felt off, too eager, too confidential. It was as if he already knew more than he was letting on. Soon after, things started to feel strange. Men in dark cars began to linger near the shipyard. Their presence was quiet but noticeable, as if they were keeping tabs on the crew. The uneasy feeling grew heavier with each passing day. Jonathan couldn't shake the thought that they had stumbled upon something far bigger than they could understand. He began to regret pulling the object from the ocean. But it was too late. The object was here, and it wasn't going anywhere. As much as they tried to carry on with their lives, the sense of being watched was impossible to ignore. The crew started to whisper about the cars, about the investigator, and about the strange feeling that trouble was coming. Then came the night when Jonathan was startled awake by a noise outside his window. The darkness outside revealed nothing, but the feeling of being watched was suffocating. He knew the object was drawing dangerous attention. By morning, he had gathered the crew to decide their next move. Should they keep it and continue to unravel its questions, or should they hand it over to someone who might be better equipped to handle it? The crew was divided. Some wanted to get rid of it and avoid the growing risk, while others felt they had a duty to uncover its purpose. Ultimately, they decided to keep it, moving it to a hidden location away from the prying eyes of the shipyard. Yet the sense of unease only grew stronger. Days turned into weeks, and the constant tension began to wear them down. They didn't have any answers, only the weight of the object and the unrelenting fear that came with it. The nights were the hardest, filled with restless sleep and a lingering dread that someone was coming for what they had found. Then one night, everything changed. As they were gathered near the hidden object, it began to glow. The faint light pulsing from its surface grew brighter, illuminating the cryptic symbols etched into it. The glow seemed alive, as if the object were trying to communicate something. The crew watched in awe and terror, frozen by the surreal sight. The glow lasted only a few minutes before fading, leaving the crew in stunned silence. Whatever this object was, it was far more than just a piece of metal. Jonathan knew they couldn't handle this alone. They needed real help, experts who could understand what they were dealing with. It wasn't an easy decision, but he made the call to contact the authorities. He explained what they had found, sparing no detail. By the next day, a team arrived in Dutch Harbor. These were not your average officials. They were serious, efficient, and gave no indication of their true purpose. They loaded the object onto a secure truck and drove away without a word of explanation. The crew watched as it disappeared down the road, a mixture of relief and sadness washing over them. Their lives had been turned upside down by this discovery, and now, just like that, it was gone. Slowly, life returned to something resembling normal. The crew went back to the sea, to the familiar rhythm of fishing and waves. Yet the memory of the object lingered. Late at night, under the vast canopy of stars, they would talk about it. Where had it come from? What was it? And most importantly, what would happen to it now? They knew they would likely never get the answers they craved. But in a way, that was okay. They had been part of something extraordinary, something that few people could even imagine. The object had changed them, left a mark that no amount of time could erase. And though it was gone, its story was far from over. And this object is not the only strange thing in the sea. Oceans, stretching as far as the eye can see, have always felt a little too big, a little too deep, and way too mysterious for comfort. People across the world have tried to explain the unexplainable, crafting wild stories of monsters lurking beneath the waves. But what if some of those tales aren't just flights of fancy? Let's dive into the murky waters of sea legends, where truth and fiction tangle like fishing nets. Take the Kraken, for example. Imagine you're on a wooden ship in freezing Scandinavian waters, and suddenly something with tentacles longer than your boat's mast emerges from the deep. Sounds like a sailor's worst nightmare, right? That's how the Kraken, a beast as big as a mountain, was born. While stories had it sinking entire ships, it's likely inspired by giant squids, those deep-sea giants that can stretch over 13 meters long. Rarely seen, their ghostly appearances fueled tales that made sailors' hearts race. Then there's the Leviathan, a creature straight out of ancient texts, described as a monster so massive it could rival the oceans themselves. It's said to be part serpent, part dragon, and all terrifying. Scholars think this legend might have been sparked by something like the Nile crocodile or even a massive whale. Picture someone seeing a crocodile's jaws snap shut or a whale's tail vanish into the waves for the first time. It's easy to see why they'd think they'd met a demon of the sea. How about the Espidachelone? Imagine landing on what you think is an island, only for the ground to move and pull you underwater. This legend of a turtle or whale so huge it fooled entire crews probably came from sightings of whales or even unusual shoals that briefly broke the surface. In a time without GPS, a whale's back in the fog could absolutely look like a new landmass. A tragic mistake, but also a perfect setup for a monster myth. Then we have sirens, those enchanting creatures that made sailors crash their ships with just a song. Originally, they weren't even mermaids, but bird-women hybrids from Greek mythology. Over time, their image morphed into the more familiar half-human, half-fish beings. Manatees or dugongs, with their oddly human-like features, likely fueled these stories. Imagine months at sea, sleep-deprived, and spotting a curious sea cow. Add a splash of loneliness and imagination, and suddenly you're writing home about a dangerous beauty singing from the rocks. Now, let's swirl into Charybdis, a name that practically screams whirlpool of doom. In Homer's Odyssey, she was a monster living in a strait, swallowing everything in her path. This might actually come from natural whirlpools or strong tidal currents. Back then, no one had a science book explaining these phenomena, so why not blame a sea beast? Jormungandr, the Norse Midgard serpent, wraps around the entire world, or so the legends say. It's supposed to rise up during Ragnarok, the Norse version of the apocalypse. Real-life sightings of enormous serpentine creatures, like the oarfish that can reach 11 meters long, probably gave this myth its scaly roots. Seeing one of those drift by? definitely unsettling. Ever heard of the Huron croin? This Scottish sea monster is said to be the biggest creature ever, disguising itself as a small fish to trick fishermen. When they got too close, it would reveal its true terrifying form. This could stem from something as simple as observing predatory fish like anglerfish, which lure prey with glowing appendages in the dark depths of the ocean. Japan's umibozu takes a different approach to terror. Instead of dragging you under, this ghostly sea spirit, often described as having a round, bald head, just appears out of nowhere to wreck your day. Some say it might be based on basking sharks, which can loom large in the water with their strange humanoid silhouette. In the sunny Caribbean, people tell tales of the lusca, a part shark, part octopus hybrid that haunts underwater caves and blue holes. It's not hard to imagine how encounters with creatures like the tiger shark or even giant octopuses inspired this myth. Blue holes are mysterious enough without throwing a monster into the mix. The bakunawa from the Philippines is a little more cosmic. This dragon serpent is said to swallow the moon, causing eclipses. While its aquatic ties are strong, the legend might have started from real sightings of large snakes swimming in the ocean. The idea of a celestial eater? That's just adding flair. Finally, let's revisit Homer for Scylla, the six-headed menace living opposite Charybdis. She'd snatch sailors off their decks with her snake-like necks. While it's easy to see her as pure fiction, some believe she might represent the dangers of coastal rock formations which could snatch ships in rough waters. These myths might seem like tall tales, but they're rooted in something very human: the need to explain the unexplainable. When you're out on the vast, empty ocean with nothing but the horizon ahead, your mind plays tricks on you. You start seeing shapes in the water, hearing songs on the wind, and imagining monsters where none exist. Or maybe, just maybe, those monsters are out there, laughing at how close we've come to the truth. Is this glowing object a strange natural phenomenon, or could it be evidence of something the government doesn't want us to know? Tell us your thoughts, and remember to like and subscribe for more.